The crystal towers of Zentara Prime stretched into the purple sky like frozen lightning. Each tower hummed with power that could move mountains or split atoms with a thought. Inside the largest tower, the Galactic Council Chamber sparkled with lights from 12 different star systems. The air itself seemed to glow with the energy of beings who had mastered the secrets of space and time. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the center of the chamber, his boots making soft sounds on the smooth floor. His broad shoulders filled out. His dark blue uniform and his hands hung at his sides like he was ready for a fight. Around him, the 12 council members sat in their special chairs that floated in the air without touching anything. The Vorthic representative looked like a living diamond that had grown into the shape of a person. Light danced through its crystal body, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music played on glass bells. Human Morrison, your species has requested full membership in our council for the third time in 5 years. Jake nodded once, keeping his face blank. That's right, Councillor Vexton. Earth and her colonies have proven themselves capable of space travel, trade, and peaceful contact with other species. We followed all the requirements in the membership charter. A soft laugh came from the Nilari section. Mindweaver Sonara had a head that was twice as long as a human's, with skin that looked like polished silver. Her black eyes never blinked, and when she spoke, her words seemed to appear inside Jake's mind instead of coming through his ears. Requirements, yes. But membership requires more than simply checking boxes on a list, does it not? The Zephyrian counselor was harder to look at. It appeared as a shifting cloud of golden light that sometimes took the shape of a person before dissolving again. When it communicated, colors flashed in the air that somehow meant words. The human species continues to rely on crude physical solutions to complex problems. Your ships still use chemical rockets alongside your primitive fusion drives. Your weapons fire solid projectiles instead of pure energy. Your computers require physical components instead of quantum consciousness matrices. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. Our technology works. Our ships can travel between stars. Our weapons can protect our people. Our computers can process information and communicate across the galaxy. Just because we do things differently doesn't mean we do them wrong. The Cathri representative made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Its body looked like flowing water held in the shape of a tall, thin person. Different, yes. But evolution moves forward, not backward. Your species clings to obsolete methods when superior alternatives exist. This suggests a fundamental inability to adapt and grow. From the gallery above, Lieutenant Amy Brooks watched the proceedings with growing frustration. She had been a Marine for 8 years before becoming a diplomat, and every instinct told her this was going badly. The aliens spoke with the kind of polite words that meant they had already made up their minds. Amy's hands gripped the railing of the observation deck. She had scars on her knuckles from fights and training, and her short brown hair was regulation length. Next to her sat 3 other humans from the embassy staff, all of them watching their commander face down, the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The question, continued Vexton, is not whether your methods function. The question is whether your species possesses the wisdom to join a civilization that has moved beyond the need for physical force and material limitations. Jake's hands slowly curled into fists. Physical force? You mean the kind that built every ship in this system? The kind that carved out every colony world humanity has settled? The kind that saved Trellian miners when their quantum drill malfunctioned last year? The Ascended Council member spoke for the first time. It looked like a person made of pure white light, with no features that could be called a face. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Those actions required admirable courage, Commander Morrison. But courage without wisdom is merely recklessness. Your species has shown itself capable of great physical feats, but wisdom requires transcendence of such crude necessities. Crude necessities, Jake repeated slowly. Like the crude necessity of eating food instead of absorbing energy from stellar. Radiation? Like the crude necessity of breathing air instead of existing in vacuum. like the crude necessity of sleeping instead of existing in a state of permanent consciousness? The council members exchanged glances through their various forms of communication. Patterns of light flickered between them faster than human eyes could follow. The Vorthic counselor's crystal body dimmed slightly, which Jake had learned meant disappointment. "Your defensive posture proves our point." Sonara's mental voice carried a note of sadness. "You interpret our concerns as attacks rather than opportunities for growth." This reactive mindset demonstrates exactly why humanity is not ready for full council membership. The Zephyrian's golden form pulsed brighter. "We do not reject your species out of malice, Commander. We simply recognize that true civilization requires the abandonment of primitive instincts. Violence, physical labor, material dependence, these are the chains that bind lesser species to their home worlds." Jake looked around the chamber, taking in the floating chairs, the walls that seemed to be made of solid light, and the beings who had evolved beyond the need for physical bodies. And what happens when those chains are the only thing holding civilization together? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several council members shifted in their seats, though Jake couldn't tell if they were uncomfortable or amused. "An interesting philosophical question," the Ascended One replied. "But philosophy is the luxury of those who have transcended such concerns. When one can manipulate matter at the quantum level, physical strength becomes irrelevant. When one can communicate through pure thought, verbal language becomes obsolete. When one can exist as pure energy, biological limitations cease to matter. Unless," Jake said quietly, "you run into something that doesn't care about your quantum manipulation or your pure thought or your energy existence. Something that only understands one language?" The chamber fell silent. Even the background humming of the city's power system seemed to fade away. Jake stood perfectly still in the center of the circle, his human form looking small and solid among the ethereal beings around him. Finally, Vexthan spoke. "The Galactic Council appreciates humanity's continued interest in membership. However, we cannot in good conscience grant full status to a species that has not yet evolved beyond its primitive origins. We encourage your people to continue their development and reapply when they have achieved a more advanced state of being." The session was over. Jake gave a short nod to the council members and turned to leave. His footsteps echoed in the chamber as he walked toward the exit, each step a reminder of his physical, material, crude human existence. Amy met him at the door to the gallery. She could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands stayed clenched at his sides. "How do you want to handle the report back to Earth?" Jake looked back at the council chamber one last time. The alien beings were already floating, away to their private discussions, probably talking about how primitive and disappointing the humans were. "Tell them the truth. We're not advanced enough for their club." As they walked through the crystal corridors toward the human embassy ship, neither of them noticed the small, dark shapes that had begun appearing at the edge of the star system. Shapes that moved without energy signatures, communicated without quantum frequencies, and existed in ways that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations couldn't detect or understand. The rejection was complete, but the real test was just beginning. Captain Lisa Turner was drinking her morning coffee when the alarm started screaming. The bridge of the scout ship, New Texas, erupted in flashing red lights and warning sounds that made everyone jump from their seats. Lisa set down her mug and ran to the main console where her sensor officer was staring at readings that made no sense. "What do we have, Pete?" Lisa asked, looking over the shoulder of engineer Pete Rodriguez. His fingers flew over the controls, but the numbers on. The screen kept changing in ways that defied physics. "I'm reading massive energy signatures at the edge of the system," Pete said, his voice tight with confusion. "But they're not showing up on visual scanners and they're not broadcasting any identification signals. The computer keeps saying there's nothing there, but the gravity sensors are going crazy." Weapons Specialist Karen White looked up from her station. "Captain, I'm picking up distress signals from the Vorthak patrol ships near the outer planets. They're reporting contact with unknown vessels, but their transmissions are breaking up." Lisa moved to the captain's chair and activated the ship's long-range scanners. The New Texas was a small vessel, built for speed and reconnaissance rather than fighting. Her crew of 12 humans was supposed to be monitoring trade routes and watching for pirates, not dealing with mysterious fleets that appeared from nowhere. "Show me what you've got," Lisa ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the outer edge of the star system. At first, everything looked normal. The familiar shapes of Vorthek patrol cruisers moved in their regular patterns, their crystal hulls glinting in the distant sunlight. Then the screen seemed to ripple, like looking at the bottom of a pool. "There," Pete pointed at the screen. "Do you see that?" Lisa squinted at the display. For a moment she thought she saw something vast and dark moving between the stars. Then it was gone, as if it had never been there at all. "Replay that section," she commanded. The computer showed the same footage again. This time, Lisa saw it clearly. A ship appeared on the screen, but it wasn't like any vessel she had ever seen. It was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the largest human battleship. Its hull was so dark that it seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Strange curves and angles covered its surface, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Holy hell," Karen whispered. "What is that thing?" Before anyone could answer, the Vorthek patrol ships opened fire. Beams of pure energy lanced out from their weapons, bright enough to blind unprotected eyes. The beams struck the dark ships. Hull and simply disappeared, like raindrops falling into a deep well. The alien vessel responded instantly. Weapons that looked like twisted metal grew from its hull and fired, something that wasn't quite energy and wasn't quite matter. The first Vorthok ship simply came apart, its crystal structure shattering into a million pieces that drifted away in the vacuum. "Get us out of here," Lisa said, but her voice was calm and steady. "Pete, how long until we can jump to hyperspace?" 2 minutes to charge the drive, Pete replied, his hands working frantically over the controls. "But Captain, look at this." The screen showed more dark ships appearing from nowhere. They materialized like shadows coming to life, each one different from the others, but all sharing the same light-absorbing hull and twisted geometry. Within seconds there were dozens of them, then hundreds. The second Vorthok patrol ship tried to escape, but one of the dark vessels moved to intercept it. The alien ship didn't seem to accelerate or use any visible propulsion, but it crossed the distance between them in the blink of an eye. Its weapons fired again, and the Vorthok cruiser simply vanished, as if it had never existed. 1 minute to jump," Pete announced, sweat beading on his forehead. Lisa activated the ship's communication system. "All stations, this is Captain Turner. We are witnessing an attack by unknown hostile forces. Prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace. Communications, get a message to Earth Command immediately." Communications Officer Danny Park worked at his station, trying to establish contact with the human fleet. "Captain, I'm having trouble getting a signal through. Something is interfering with our transmissions." On the screen, more Vorthok ships arrived to investigate the attack. These were larger vessels, heavy cruisers with weapons that could crack planets. They formed a battle line and opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams, plasma cannons, and quantum torpedoes struck. The dark ships in a display of firepower that should have destroyed anything in space. The dark ships absorbed it all. Their hulls seemed to drink in the energy, growing darker and more solid with each hit. Then they returned fire, and the Vorthok battle line began to disappear, ship by ship. 30 seconds to jump," Pete called out. Lisa watched the massacre on her screen, knowing that she was seeing something that would change the galaxy forever. The Vorthok were one of the most advanced races in known space. Their ships were powered by zero-point energy. Their weapons could manipulate matter at the quantum level, and their shields could deflect anything short of a supernova. None of it mattered. The dark ships moved through the Vorthok fleet like wolves through sheep, destroying everything they touched with casual ease. "Jump drive ready," Pete announced. "Do it," Lisa ordered. The New Texas vanished into hyperspace just as the last Vorthok ship died. Behind them, the dark fleet continued its advance toward the inner planets, leaving nothing but debris and silence in their wake. The journey to Earth took 3 days. During that time, Lisa and her crew worked around the clock to analyze the sensor data they had collected. The results were terrifying. The dark ships used technology that didn't follow any known laws of physics. They seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime, which explained why they were so hard to detect. They're specifically designed to fight advanced civilizations. Pete explained during a briefing in the ship's small conference room. Their weapons are tuned to counter energy shields, their hulls absorb quantum attacks, and their propulsion systems bypass the normal limitations of faster-than-light travel. Karen looked up from her weapons analysis. What about their defenses? There has to be something that can hurt them, Pete shook his head. I've run every simulation I can think of. Energy weapons make them stronger. Quantum attacks bounce off their hulls. Even gravity weapons seem to have no effect. Lisa stared at the data scrolling across the screen. What about physical attacks, kinetic weapons? Good old-fashioned bullets and missiles? I don't know, Pete admitted. The sensor data doesn't show how they'd react to purely physical attacks. But, Captain, no one uses kinetic weapons anymore. They're too slow? Too limited? Too primitive? The word primitive hung in the air like an accusation. Lisa thought about the Galactic Council's rejection of humanity just 3 months ago. The aliens had called humans crude and backward for still using physical weapons and chemical propulsion. Maybe primitive is exactly what we need, Lisa said quietly. When the New Texas reached Earth, Lisa found a galaxy in chaos. The dark ships had struck 6 more systems, destroying everything they found. The Galactic Council had issued emergency broadcasts calling for unity and resistance, but their most advanced fleets were being swept aside like leaves in a hurricane. The aliens, who had once called humans too primitive to join their civilization, were now facing an enemy that their advanced technology couldn't touch. And in the deepest vaults of human military bases, weapons that had been considered obsolete for centuries were being pulled out of storage and examined with new interest. The dark ships had a name now. Survivors called them the Kethmori, and they were coming for every advanced civilization in the galaxy, but they had made one mistake in their calculations. They had planned for quantum weapons and energy, shields and zero-point power sources. They had never planned for humans with guns. Admiral Rick Thompson stood on the bridge of the battleship, Liberty's Edge, and watched the galaxy burn. The main screen showed system after system going dark as the Kethmori fleet advanced deeper into civilized space. Each red mark on the star map represented billions of lives lost and entire worlds reduced to smoking ruins. Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the Galactic Council. Communications Officer Linda Hayes reported from her station. Her voice was steady, but Rick could see the tension in her shoulders. Put it through, Rick ordered. The screen flickered and showed High Counselor Vexton S. crystal form, but the elegant being looked different now. Cracks ran through his translucent body, and his usual musical voice was broken and desperate. Admiral Thompson, the situation has become critical. The Kethmori have destroyed the Nellari homeworld. The Zephyrian Energy Collective has been completely absorbed. We estimate that 6 council species have been eliminated entirely. Rick's jaw tightened. The Nellari had been telepaths who could read minds across star systems. The Zephyrians had existed as pure energy for thousands of years. If beings that advanced could be wiped out so easily, what hope did anyone have? What about the other council members? Rick asked. The survivors are fleeing to the Outer Rim systems, Vexton replied. Our most advanced weapons are useless against them. Our shields actually make their attacks more powerful. Everything we have learned about warfare over the past million years has become meaningless. In the background, Rick could hear other voices speaking in alien languages. The sounds were frightened and desperate. These were beings who had mastered the secrets of space and time, and now they were running like scared children. Admiral, Vexton continued, the Galactic Council formally requests military assistance from the human fleet. We know that your application for membership was recently denied, but we are prepared to offer full council status immediately in exchange for your help. Rick almost laughed. 3 months ago, these same beings had called humans too primitive to join their civilization. Now they were offering everything they had previously denied. What makes you think we can do anything that you can't? Your technology is different, Vexen said. Primitive, but different. Perhaps that difference might be advantageous. The transmission ended, leaving Rick alone with his thoughts. Around him, the bridge crew continued their work, but he could see the fear in their eyes. The human fleet was powerful by human standards, but they had all seen the reports of what happened when the Kathmori attacked. Advanced civilizations, with weapons that could destroy stars, had been swept aside like dust. Dr. Helen Cruz entered the bridge carrying a datapad filled with her latest research. She was a xenobiologist who had spent her career studying alien technology, and now she was the only person who might understand how to fight the Kathmori. Admiral, I've finished analyzing the sensor data from the Vorthik encounters. Helen sighed, her voice excited despite the grim situation. I think I know why their weapons are so effective. Rick gestured for her to continue. The Kathmori have been planning this invasion for a very long time, Helen explained. Their technology is specifically designed to counter every type of advanced weapon system used by galactic civilizations. Their hulls absorb energy attacks and convert them into power. Their shields phase shift to avoid quantum weapons. Their armor regenerates when damaged by particle beams. So they're invincible? Rick asked. Against advanced technology, yes, Helen replied. But Admiral, they've been preparing to fight energy weapons, quantum torpedoes, and zero-point power systems. They've never encountered anything like our weapons. Rick raised an eyebrow. Our weapons? Helen activated her datapad and showed him a comparison chart. Look at this. Galactic standard weapons fire pure energy or manipulate matter at the quantum level. Our weapons fire solid projectiles using chemical propulsion. Their shields are designed to stop plasma and energy beams, not chunks of metal moving at high speed. You're talking about bullets and missiles, Rick said. Exactly. And not just small arms. Our ship weapons use mass drivers that fire solid slugs. Our missiles use chemical explosives, and our nuclear warheads create destruction through fusion reactions, not exotic matter manipulation. Rick studied the data, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. You think our primitive weapons might actually work? I think they might be exactly what we need, Helen said. The Kathmori have spent centuries preparing for a war against advanced civilizations. They never prepared for a war against humans. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Rick sent orders to every human fleet in the galaxy, calling them to assemble at the Kepler station near the edge of human space. He also sent a message to Earth Command, requesting that every available weapon be shipped to the front lines. Captain Frank Washington arrived first, commanding a squadron of heavy cruisers from the Sol Defense Force. His ships were owned by Galactic standards, using fusion drives instead of quantum engines and carrying weapons that most aliens considered obsolete. But they were fast, tough, and crewed by humans who knew how to fight. Admiral, Frank said as he stepped onto the bridge of the Liberty's Edge, I brought everything I could scrape together. 12 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, and about 50 fighter craft. It's not much against a fleet that's been destroying entire star systems. It might be enough, Rick replied. We're not going to fight them the way the aliens did. We're going to fight them like humans. Over the next 2 days, the human fleet grew as ships arrived from every corner of human space. There were military vessels with railguns and missile launchers, converted civilian ships armed with mining lasers and cargo-launched torpedoes, and even some experimental craft that had been built using hybrid human-alien technology. The alien refugees began arriving as well. Survivors from the destroyed council worlds came in whatever ships they could find, their advanced vessels crippled and their crews traumatized. The proud beings who had once dismissed humanity as primitive now looked to human ships for protection. Mindweaver. Sonara's ship limped into the station with hull damage and failing life support. The Nillari's elongated head was bandaged and her silver skin had lost its shine. When she spoke to Rick, Her mental voice was weak and filled with pain. "Admiral Thompson, my people are extinct. The Kethmori turned our telepathic networks against us, using our own minds as weapons. In 3 days, they destroyed a civilization that had existed for 50,000 years. Rick felt a surge of anger. The Nilari had been arrogant and condescending, but they hadn't deserved genocide. How many other council species are gone? 6 confirmed extinctions, Sinara replied. 3 more are missing and presumed destroyed. The Ascended Ones tried to exist in pure energy form to escape, but the Kethmori absorbed them entirely. And the Kethmori are still advancing? Yes, they're moving toward the galactic core, destroying everything in their path. Their fleet is massive, Admiral. Thousands of ships, each one capable of destroying a planet. And they're getting stronger with every attack. Rick looked out at the assembled human fleet. Compared to the forces that had been defeated, it was pitifully small. But it was also something the Kethmori had never faced before. "Dr. Cruz," he called to the xenobiologist, "how long before they reach the next major system?" 2 weeks, maybe less, Helen replied. The Corvin system has a population of 12 billion and some of the most advanced defense platforms in the galaxy. Then that's where we make our stand, Rick decided. Signal all ships. We're going to show these ancient nightmares what happens when they mess with humanity. The human fleet began to move, heading toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Behind them, the alien refugees watched in amazement as the species they had once dismissed as primitive prepared to face an enemy that had destroyed civilizations older than Earth itself. The real war was about to begin. Colonel Steve Martinez checked his rifle one last time before stepping into the boarding pod. The weapon was an old design, firing metal bullets propelled by chemical explosives. Most aliens thought it was laughably primitive, but Steve had used guns like this to fight pirates and smugglers across human space. Today, he would find out if they could kill something that had destroyed entire star systems. "Remember, people," Steve said to his squad of 12 Marines, "we don't know what their personal defenses look like. Keep your distance, use cover, and put as much lead in the air as possible." Sergeant Mike Johnson nodded from his position near the pod's rear hatch. He carried a heavy machine gun that could fire 800 rounds per minute. Next to him, Corporal Sarah Davis held a launcher loaded with high-explosive grenades. The rest of the squad carried assault rifles, shotguns, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. Through the pod's small window, Steve could see the Kethmori ship they were approaching. It hung in space like a piece of the night sky that had been carved into the shape of a vessel. Its dark hull absorbed all light, making it difficult to judge its size or distance. The only way to tell it was there at all was the way it blocked out the stars behind it. 30 seconds to impact, announced the pod pilot. Lieutenant Tony Clark. He was an engineer who had volunteered to fly the dangerous mission. Even though his specialty was building things rather than destroying them, Steve activated his COM. "Unit, all squads, this is Martinez. Remember, this is a reconnaissance mission first. We need to learn how these things work so we can kill more of them later. Don't take unnecessary risks, but don't hesitate to defend yourselves." The boarding pod hit the Kethmori hull with a grinding crash that shook everyone inside. Immediately, cutting torches began burning through the alien metal, creating a hole large enough for the Marines to enter. Steve was the first one through, dropping into a corridor that seemed to be made of living shadow. The inside of the ship was worse than the outside. The walls curved in impossible directions, covered with patterns that made Steve's eyes water when he looked at them directly. The air was thick and warm, with a smell like burning metal and rotting flowers. Emergency lights flickered along the ceiling, but they cast shadows that moved independently of the people beneath them. "Stay together," Steve whispered into his radio. "Johnson, take point. Davis, watch R6. The squad moved down the corridor. In standard formation, weapons ready and eyes scanning for threats. Their boots made soft sounds on the strange floor, which seemed to give slightly with each step. Steve could hear his heart beating in his ears, but his hands were steady on his rifle, The first Kethmori they encountered was waiting around a corner. It stood 8 feet tall, with a body that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts of different machines. Its skin was the same light-absorbing black as the ship's hull, and it had too many joints in all the wrong places. Where its face should have been, there was only a smooth surface that reflected nothing. The creature raised one arm, and Steve could see energy beginning to gather around its hand. Without thinking, he fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets struck the alien with wet impacts, punching through whatever was serving as its chest. The creature staggered backward, dark fluid leaking from the wounds, and collapsed to the floor. "Holy hell," Mike whispered. It actually worked. More Kethmori appeared from side passages, moving with fluid grace that was terrifying to watch. They carried weapons that looked like twisted metal sculptures, energy crackling around their surfaces. When they fired, beams of force that could cut through starship armor lanced down the corridor. The Marines scattered for cover behind whatever they could find. Steve dove behind a section of wall that jutted out at an odd angle, feeling the heat of an energy beam pass inches from his head. The alien weapons were devastating, but they were designed to penetrate energy shields and quantum armor, not simple. "Metal barriers, open fire!" Steve shouted. The corridor erupted in gunfire. 12 assault rifles chattered on full automatic, filling the air with lead. Mike's machine gun added its voice to the chaos, sending streams of bullets downrange. Sarah's grenade launcher thumped repeatedly, explosions lighting up the dark hallway. The Kethmori had personal shields, but they flickered and died under the hail of metal projectiles. Their energy weapons were powerful, but they couldn't track targets that moved unpredictably and took cover behind physical obstacles. Within minutes, the alien defenders were dead or retreating deeper into the ship. "Advance by sections," Steve ordered. "First team, move up." The Marines pushed deeper into the vessel, fighting running battles with Kethmori defenders at every turn. The aliens were dangerous individually, but they seemed confused by human tactics. They were used to fighting enemies who relied on energy shields and quantum weapons, not soldiers who ducked behind corners and threw grenades at the ships. Engineering section, Tony Clark worked frantically to understand the alien technology. The Kethmori power systems were unlike anything he had ever seen, drawing energy from sources that shouldn't exist and channeling it through crystalline structures that defied physics. "Colonel, you need to see this," Tony called over the radio. Steve made his way to the engineering bay, leaving half his squad to guard the corridor. The room was filled with machinery that hurt to look at directly, all curves and angles that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. "What am I looking at?" Steve asked. "Their power source," Tony replied, pointing to a structure in the center of the room. "It's not just absorbing energy from our weapons. It's designed to feed on any high-energy system it encounters. Plasma, reactors, quantum cores, zero-point generators, all of it just makes them stronger." Steve studied the alien device. "What about our fusion reactors?" "Those might be different," Tony said. "Fusion is a much simpler process. It doesn't use exotic matter or quantum effects. They might not be able to absorb that kind of energy. Can you shut this thing down?" Tony looked at the control panels, which were covered in symbols that shifted and changed as he watched. "I don't know how to read their systems, but I might be able to overload it, if I can get enough chemical explosives in the right places." "Do it," Steve ordered. While Tony worked on his sabotage, the Marines fought their way to the ship's bridge. The Kethmori resistance was getting stronger as they moved deeper into the vessel, but human weapons continued to prove effective. Bullets punched through alien armor, grenades shattered their defensive positions, and good old-fashioned human aggression overwhelmed their tactical systems. The bridge was a nightmare of twisted metal and pulsing lights. In the center sat what might have been the ship's captain, a creature even larger and more disturbing than the others. It turned toward the approaching humans, energy gathering around its form like a storm. "Take it down!" Steve shouted. Every Marine in the squad opened fire at once. The alien captain's shields flared and died under the concentrated barrage. Its energy weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Dark fluid sprayed across the bridge, as dozens of bullets found their mark. "Charges set," Tony reported over the radio. "Everyone out now." The Marines ran through the corridors they had fought to clear, racing against time as Tony's explosives counted down. Behind them, the ship's power systems began to overload, unable to contain the chain reaction. Spreading through their exotic matter cores, they reached the boarding pod just as the explosions began. Tony fired up the engines and pulled away from the dying Kethmori vessel, watching as it tore itself apart from the inside. Internal explosions rippled through its hull, and the dark metal began to glow with heat it could no longer absorb. "Liberty's Edge, this is boarding party Alpha, Steve," reported to Admiral Thompson. "Mission accomplished? The primitive humans just killed themselves in advanced alien warship." The Kethmori vessel exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the star system. It was the first time anyone had successfully destroyed one of their ships, and the psychological impact was enormous. Across the galaxy, alien refugees who had given up hope began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare might end, but more importantly, humanity had learned that their weapons worked. The Kethmori could absorb energy and manipulate matter at the quantum level, but they had never encountered anything as simple and brutal as a bullet fired from a gun. The galaxy's salvation would come not from advanced technology, but from the primitive weapons that civilized beings had left behind long ago. The real fight was just beginning. General Frank Washington stood in the command center of the orbital station above New Geneva, watching dozens of screens that showed the largest fleet ever assembled in human history. Ships stretched across the star system like a metal constellation. Everything from massive battleships to converted cargo haulers armed with mining equipment. It wasn't the most advanced fleet in the galaxy, but it was about to become the most important. "General, we're receiving confirmation from all sector commanders," reported Captain Susan Boyd from her position at the communications console. "The 7th Fleet has arrived from the Centauri systems. The 3rd Marine Division is loaded and ready for deployment, and the Colonial Defense Force has contributed everything they have." Frank nodded, his weathered face showing the strain of the past weeks. He had been fighting wars for 30 years, but never anything like this. The enemy they faced had destroyed civilizations that had mastered the secrets of space and time. Now it was up to humans with guns and determination to stop them. Dr. Amy Brooks entered the command center, carrying a datapad filled with intelligence reports. She had been working around the clock with alien survivors, trying to understand Kethmori psychology and tactics. The information she had gathered was disturbing but useful. "General, I've completed my analysis of the Kethmori behavioral patterns," Amy said, setting the datapad on the central table. "The good news is that we've learned why they're so effective against advanced civilizations. The bad news is what they're really trying to accomplish." Frank gestured for her to continue. "The Kethmori aren't just conquerors," Amy explained. "They're refugees from another galaxy entirely. Their own civilization was destroyed by something they call the Void Crawlers, entities that exist between dimensions. The Kethmori have been running for thousands of years, and they believe that only by controlling all galactic technology can they prevent another invasion." "So they're destroying entire species out of fear?" Frank asked. "Exactly, but there's more. Mindweaver Sonara helped me access some of the telepathic memories recovered from Nilari survivors. The Kethmori are building something in the galactic core, using technology stolen from every civilization they've conquered." Frank studied the star charts on the main screen. "What kind of something?" "A dimensional gateway," Amy replied. "They're trying to open a permanent passage to their home galaxy so they can bring through whatever Kethmori survivors are left. But the power requirements are enormous. They need to drain the energy from dozens of star systems to make it work. And if they succeed, then millions of Kethmori ships pour through the gateway and this galaxy becomes their new home. Every other species becomes extinct." Frank felt a cold anger building in his chest. The aliens who had once dismissed humanity as primitive were now depending on human courage to save them from annihilation. It would have been ironic if it wasn't so tragic. "How much time do we have?" Frank asked. According to our calculations, they'll have enough energy to open the gateway in 2 weeks, Amy replied. Maybe less. Frank activated the fleet communication system, sending his voice to every human ship in the system. All commanders, this is General Washington. Operation Hammerstrike is now in effect. We are moving to assault the Kethmori stronghold in the Galactic core. This is not a rescue mission or a reconnaissance operation. This is a fight to the death, with the survival of every species in the galaxy hanging in the balance. The massive fleet began to move, ships taking their positions in formation. At the center, Admiral Rick Thompson commanded the main battle line from the Liberty's Edge. His heavy battleships carried rail guns that could fire solid projectiles at nearly the speed of light. Backed up by missile launchers loaded with nuclear warheads. Captain Susan Boyd took command of the carrier group, leading a squadron of ships that launched swarms of fighter craft armed with machine guns and rockets. The pilots were young and aggressive, trained to fly fast and hit hard rather than relying on advanced technology. The alien survivors who had joined the fleet provided intelligence and support. Mindweaver Sinara, despite her injuries, used her telepathic abilities to coordinate between human and alien units. The remaining Vorthek engineers worked frantically to upgrade human weapons with hybrid technology that combined the best of both approaches. General, we're detecting massive Kethmori formations near the Galactic core, reported the sensor officer. Preliminary scans show at least 3,000 enemy vessels, plus the dimensional gateway structure. Frank looked at the tactical display, showing the enormous enemy fleet. It was 10 times larger than anything they had faced before, but there was no choice except to attack. If the Kethmori completed their gateway, the war would be over before it truly began. All ships, this is Washington, Frank announced. We're going in hard and fast. Remember what we learned from previous engagements. Their shields can't stop kinetic weapons, their hulls can't regenerate from chemical explosives, and their sensors have trouble tracking analog guidance systems. We're not the most advanced fleet in the galaxy, but we're the one that's going to win this war. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the galactic core, where ancient stars burned with fierce intensity. Before them stretched the largest concentration of Kethmori ships ever seen, dark vessels that seemed to absorb the light of nearby suns. At the center of their formation, a massive structure grew like a cancer among the stars. The dimensional gateway was already partially active. Space around it rippled and twisted, showing glimpses of another galaxy where strange lights moved. In the darkness, Kethmori ships fed streams of stolen energy into the structure, bringing it closer to full activation with each passing minute. All units, commence attack, Frank ordered. The human fleet opened fire with everything they had. Railgun slugs streaked across space at tremendous velocity, smashing through Kethmori shields that were designed to stop energy weapons. Nuclear missiles followed, their chemical propulsion systems invisible to alien sensors until the warheads detonated in brilliant flashes. The Kethmori response was immediate and devastating. Their energy weapons lanced out in return, beams of force that could vaporize asteroids. But human ships were built differently than alien vessels. They used thick armor instead of energy shields, analog computers instead of quantum processors, and redundant systems instead of elegant efficiency. When a Kethmori beam struck a human battleship, it burned through the outer hull but couldn't penetrate the layers of steel and ceramic beneath. When they tried to hack human computers, they found mechanical systems that operated with gears and circuits instead of quantum matrices. Second wave, begin your attack run, Frank commanded. Captain Susan Boyd led her fighters into the heart of the enemy formation, dodging between massive Kethmori vessels while her pilots strafed their hulls with machine gun fire. The bullets couldn't destroy the alien ships, but they could damage critical systems and create weak points for the heavier weapons to exploit. Meanwhile, Admiral Rick Thompson pushed his battle line forward, trading fire with Kethmori heavy cruisers at point-blank range. His ships took terrible damage, but they kept fighting with the stubborn determination that had carried humanity to the stars. General, we're detecting power fluctuations in the dimensional gateway, reported the science officer. If we can hit With enough kinetic force, we might be able to disrupt the opening sequence. Frank looked at the tactical display, calculating distances and firing solutions. The gateway was heavily defended, surrounded by the most powerful Kethmori ships in their fleet. Getting close enough to attack it would require a sacrifice that no commander wanted to make. "Admiral Thompson, this is Washington," Frank said. Into his communicator. "I need you to take your battle group straight at that gateway. Everything you've got, all guns blazing." "Understood, General," Rick replied. "We'll punch a hole through their defenses or die trying." The human battle line charged toward the dimensional gateway, guns firing continuously as Kethmori ships moved to intercept them. The space between the fleets filled with explosions and weapon fire, a deadly light show that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Behind them, more human ships followed, carrying the hopes of every species that had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of something better. The primitive, brawny humans were about to prove that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective ones. Captain Lisa Turner gripped the controls of her fighter as explosions lit up the space around her. The battle for the Galactic core had been raging for 6 hours, and both sides were bleeding ships like water from a broken dam. Her squadron had started with 24 fighters, but now only 8 remained operational. "Lightning Leader, this is command," came General Washington's voice over the radio. "We need you to escort the boarding teams to the gateway structure. This is our last chance to stop the dimensional breach." Lisa looked through her cockpit at the massive Kethmori gateway, a structure the size of a small moon that twisted space around itself like a wound in reality. Energy streams from destroyed civilizations fed into its core, bringing it closer to full activation with each passing second. Through the partially opened portal, she could see the dark shapes of more Kethmori ships waiting to pour through. "Copy that, Command," Lisa replied. "Lightning Squadron, form up on me. We're escorting the Marines to that thing." Behind her, Colonel Steve Martinez and his assault teams prepared for the most dangerous mission in human history. Their target was the Gateway's control center, buried deep inside a structure that defied every law of physics they understood. But they had learned that Kethmori technology, no matter how advanced, could still be destroyed by humans with guns and explosives. Pete Rodriguez worked frantically at his engineering station aboard the Liberty's Edge, trying to find a weakness in the Gateway's defenses. The structure was protected by energy barriers that could deflect anything short of a supernova, but Pete had noticed something interesting in the sensor readings. "Admiral Thompson, I think I found something," Pete called out over the noise of the battle. The Gateway's power distribution system uses quantum conduits to channel energy from the feeding ships, but those conduits have to be physically connected to work. Admiral Rick Thompson looked up from the tactical display where he was coordinating the fleet's attack. "What are you saying, Pete?" "If we can sever enough of those connections, the Gateway won't have enough power to complete the dimensional breach. But we'll need to get ships in close, and I mean really close." Rick studied the battle raging around the Gateway. Kethmori ships fought with desperate fury to protect their ultimate weapon, while human vessels traded fire at ranges that would have been considered suicidal in any normal engagement. "How close?" "Ramming distance," Pete replied grimly. Rick activated the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Thompson. I need volunteers for a special mission. We're going to ram those power conduits and shut down the Gateway. This is a one-way trip, people." The response was immediate. Captain after captain volunteered their ships and crews for the suicide mission. These were men and women who had signed up to explore the galaxy and protect human colonies, but now they were offering their lives to save every species in existence. Meanwhile, Lisa's fighters screamed through the Kethmori defensive lines, dodging energy beams and missile salvos as they escorted the Marine boarding pods toward the Gateway. Her wingman, Lieutenant Danny Park, took a direct hit from a Kethmori cruiser and exploded in a ball of fire, but the rest of the squadron pressed on. "Boarding pods away," announced the transport pilot over the radio. "Marines are committed to the target." Steve Martinez felt his stomach drop as the boarding pod accelerated toward the gateway structure. Through the small window, he could see the twisted metal surface approaching at tremendous speed. The structure was covered in defensive weapons that tracked their approach, but most of them were designed to stop energy attacks rather than physical projectiles. "Remember the plan?" Steve told his Marines over the intercom. "We get in, we find the control center, and we blow it to hell. No fancy tactics, no complicated strategies. We're going to break their toys the old-fashioned way." The boarding pod hit the gateway surface with a crash that rattled Steve's teeth. Cutting torches immediately began burning through the alien metal while the Marines prepared for battle. Around them, more pods landed at different points on the structure, each one carrying a team of humans with explosives and determination. Inside the gateway, the corridors were even more disturbing than those on the Kethmori ships. The walls seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, creating optical illusions that made navigation nearly impossible. Strange energies crackled through the air, and the temperature fluctuated wildly from freezing cold to burning hot. "Stay together," Steve ordered as his squad moved deeper into the structure. "Johnson, keep that machine gun ready. Davis, I want grenades on anything that moves." They encountered their first Kethmori, defenders at a junction where three corridors met in ways that violated basic geometry. The aliens had set up defensive positions behind barriers of crystallized energy, their weapons trained on the approaching humans. "Contact front?" Mike Johnson shouted, opening fire with his heavy machine gun. The bullets tore through the energy barriers like they were made of paper, forcing the Kethmori to take cover behind more solid obstacles. Sarah Davis lobbed a grenade over the alien position, the explosion lighting up the corridor and sending debris flying in all directions. The Marines advanced through the smoke, firing continuously as they overwhelmed the defensive position outside the gateway. Admiral Rick Thompson led the final assault against the power conduits. His battleship Liberty's Edge charged straight at the largest energy stream, her hull glowing from enemy fire. Around him, other human ships made their own suicide runs, each one targeting a different part of the gateway's power system. "This is for everyone who called us primitive," Rick said quietly as his ship struck the quantum conduit at full speed. The explosion was visible across the entire star system. The Liberty's Edge and her crew of 800 humans died instantly, but their sacrifice severed one of the main power feeds to the gateway. Similar explosions erupted around the structure as more human ships gave their lives to cripple the Kethmori weapon. Deep inside the gateway, Steve's team found the control center, a vast chamber filled with machinery that existed in more dimensions than the human mind could process. At its center sat a device that channeled the stolen energy of entire civilizations, feeding it into the dimensional breach that would doom the galaxy. "There," Steve pointed at the central control node. "That's what we came to destroy." Tony Clark, the engineer who had volunteered for the mission, studied the alien controls with growing understanding. "I can overload their power systems, but I'll need to access the main control matrix. And Colonel, once I start this process, we won't be able to stop it." "Do it," Steve ordered. Tony's fingers flew over the alien controls, using techniques he had learned from studying captured Kethmori technology. The machinery began to respond, its harmonious humming changing to a discordant whine that grew louder with each passing second. "Overload initiated," Tony announced. "We have maybe 2 minutes before this whole structure comes apart." "All teams, this is Martinez," Steve broadcast on all frequencies. "Mission accomplished. Everyone out, now." The Marines ran through the collapsing corridors as the gateway's power systems tore themselves apart. Behind them, explosions rippled through the structure as containment fields failed and exotic matter went critical. The dimensional breach began to collapse, cutting off the Kethmori reinforcements waiting in their home galaxy. Lisa's fighters swooped in to collect the surviving boarding pods, racing against time as the gateway structure began to implode. Not all the Marines made it out, but those who did carried with them the knowledge that they had saved the galaxy. The explosion of the dimensional gateway was like the birth of a new star. Light erupted across the galactic core, washing over the assembled fleets and temporarily blinding sensors on both sides. When the glare faded, the massive Kathmori structure was gone, taking with it the hopes of an entire species. The surviving Kathmori ships, cut off from their home galaxy and faced with the destruction of their ultimate weapon, began to surrender. Their ancient fear of the void crawlers was nothing compared to their amazement at what the primitive humans had accomplished. 6 months later, Admiral Rick Thompson stood in the rebuilt council chambers on Zentara Prime. The crystal towers had been repaired, but the beings who inhabited them were forever changed. The Galactic Council now included humanity as not just members, but as the primary peacekeeping force in the galaxy. The motion to establish the Human Defense Corps is approved unanimously, announced High Counselor Vexton, his crystal form no longer showing the cracks of fear and desperation. The galaxy owes its existence to human courage and ingenuity. Outside the council chambers, construction crews worked to rebuild the civilizations that had been damaged or destroyed. Humans and aliens labored side by side, their different approaches to problem-solving, creating solutions that neither could have achieved alone. The Kathmori survivors had been granted sanctuary on a world at the edge of human space, where they slowly learned to live without fear. Their ancient knowledge, combined with human determination, was already producing new technologies that would benefit every species in the galaxy.